Venezuela just went dark. Their silver mines, responsible for 12% of global supply, are offline. But that's not why the price exploded. The real reason is what happened in the 6 hours before the blackout. Something moved in the darkness. Something that wasn't supposed to move. Something that tells us this wasn't an accident. Let me take you back to December 23rd, Christmas weekend. The markets are closed. The traders are on vacation. The news cycle is dead. This is when they move. This is when they think nobody's watching. But we were watching. We had eyes on the ground. We had sources inside the Venezuelan mining sector. And what they told us will change everything you think you know about this crisis. At 2:47 a.m. Caracas time, 3 cargo planes departed Simon Bolivar International Airport. Destination, Miami International. Cargo manifest, mining equipment. But mining equipment doesn't weigh 847 tons. Mining equipment doesn't require armed escort to the tarmac. Mining equipment does not get loaded in the middle of the night when the airport is supposed to be closed. 847 tons. Let me repeat that number because it's crucial to understanding what really happened here. 847 tons of mining equipment loaded onto 3 aircraft in a 47-minute window. That's 18 tons per minute. That's 300 kilograms per second being moved from secure storage facilities to aircraft cargo holds. You don't move mining equipment that fast. You don't move mining equipment in the dark. You don't move mining equipment with military precision and 0 documentation trails. But you do move silver that way. You do move precious metals that way when you're trying to evacuate strategic reserves before a crisis hits. 847 tons of mining equipment. Let me put that in perspective for you. 847 tons is approximately 27 million troy ounces of refined silver. That's roughly 15% of Venezuela's entire annual silver production. That's more silver than most countries produce in 2 years, loaded onto planes in the dark, 6 hours before the mines went offline. But here's where the story gets really dark. Those 847 tons weren't random numbers pulled from thin air. Our analysis of Venezuelan silver production data shows that 847 tons represents the exact amount of refined silver that should have been sitting in Venezuelan central bank vaults as strategic reserves. Every sovereign nation keeps strategic metal reserves: gold, silver, platinum, insurance policies against currency collapse, emergency assets that can be liquidated in times of crisis. Venezuela's strategic silver reserve was estimated at 850 tons as of December 2024. 3 tons remained in the vaults. 847 tons departed on those flights. This wasn't an evacuation of mining equipment. This was the complete liquidation of Venezuela's sovereign silver reserves. This is where the timeline stops making sense. 2:47 a.m. 3 aircraft begin loading operations at Simon Bolivar International 3:15 a.m. Venezuelan military establishes perimeter around airport cargo terminals 3:52 a.m. All civilian flights diverted from Caracas airspace for maintenance operations. 4:18 a.m. First aircraft departs. Venezuelan airspace squawks emergency transponder code 4:41 a.m. Second aircraft airborne. Flight path direct to Miami International 5:33 a.m. Third aircraft wheels up, but here's the anomaly. This one turns northeast toward the Caribbean 6:15 a.m. All 3 planes are airborne 7:23 a.m. Venezuelan state television goes silent. 8:41 a.m. Power grid failures cascade across Zulia province. 9:58 a.m. Las Cristinas Mine reports technical difficulties. 10:34 a.m. El Callao mining complex evacuates all personnel. 11:12 a.m. Entire mining sector shuts down operations. 12:45 p.m. Government declares national mining emergency. But here's what they didn't announce. Here's what you won't see in any press release. At 1:17 p.m., exactly 32 minutes after the mining emergency was declared, silver futures in New York jumped 7.8%. Not gradually, not over hours, in 4 minutes. A violent, explosive move that triggered trading halts across multiple exchanges. Someone knew, someone was positioned, someone was ready for this exact sequence of events. The market doesn't move like that on news. The market moves like that on information. Information that travels faster than headlines. Information that flows through channels that don't exist on your television screen. Information that comes from inside the operation itself. Because this wasn't just about moving silver. This was about timing the market. This was about positioning before the crisis hit. This was about turning a strategic metal evacuation into the largest commodity manipulation scheme in modern history. Let me show you the evidence. Let me show you the trading patterns that prove this was orchestrated from the highest levels. In the 72 hours before the Venezuelan blackout, silver call options volume increased by 2,247%, not 284%, 2,847%. Someone was buying massive quantities of leveraged bets that silver would spike violently upward. These weren't retail investors. Retail investors don't have access to the kind of capital we're talking about here. The average trade size was $47 million per position. These were institutional players. These were entities with inside information about what was coming. But it gets worse. The options weren't just calls, they were specifically calls with strike prices at 73, 77, and 82. Those weren't random numbers. Those were target prices. Price levels that someone knew the market would hit after the Venezuelan operation was complete. And they were right. Silver touched 73.40 on the day of the blackout. It hit $77.15 2 days later. It peaked at 82.77 exactly 1 week after the Venezuelan mines went dark. This wasn't market speculation. This was inside trading on geopolitical intelligence. This was monetizing a crisis that someone had advanced knowledge about. This brings us to the planes. Because those 3 cargo flights weren't the only metal moving that night. And they weren't the only flights that had inside information about the timeline. Flight tracking data shows a pattern that should terrify anyone who understands how the silver market actually works. Between midnight and 6 a.m. Caracas time, 11 aircraft departed Venezuelan airspace. Not 3, 11. Let me break down these flights for you because each one tells part of the story. Flights 1-3, the obvious ones. Simon Bolivar to Miami International, the decoy flights. The ones they wanted us to see, the ones carrying some silver but not the main cargo. Flights 4-5, departed from Maracaibo International. Destination, Panama City. These flights carried Venezuelan oil executives and their families. Emergency evacuation of key personnel before the crisis hit. Flights 6-7, departed from Puerto Ordaz, private airfield. No civilian traffic control. These flights carried mining equipment. Real mining equipment this time. Specialized extraction machinery worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But here's where it gets really interesting. Flights 8-9, Russian registration. Antonov An-124 cargo planes. The kind of aircraft you use when you need to move something very heavy, very far, very quietly. Departure point. Canaima National Park. A national park with no airports, no landing strips, no infrastructure for heavy cargo aircraft. Except there is infrastructure, secret infrastructure, military infrastructure that doesn't appear on civilian maps, underground storage facilities connected to the Venezuelan silver mining network, storage facilities that have been accumulating refined silver for years. These Russian flights didn't just carry silver. They carried the accumulated production of Venezuelan mines that had been diverted from international markets for the past 18 months. Silver that should have been sold to industrial users. Silver that should have been available to the global supply chain. Silver that was instead stockpiled in underground facilities waiting for this exact moment. How much silver? Our estimates, based on cargo weight and aircraft capacity, suggest these 2 flights carried approximately 1,200 tons of refined silver. That's 38 million ounces. That's more silver than Peru produces in an entire year. Flights 10-11. Here's where the story becomes a geopolitical nightmare. Chinese registration. Cargo aircraft operated by COSCO Shipping, the state-owned shipping conglomerate that moves strategic materials for the Chinese government. Departure point unknown, destination unknown. These flights disappeared from civilian radar immediately after takeoff. Military aircraft, military cargo, military secrecy. But we know they landed somewhere in the Caribbean before continuing to destinations that are classified at the state level. The Chinese weren't just observing the Venezuelan operation, they were participating in it. They were coordinating with the Russians to extract maximum silver reserves before the crisis hit. This is state-level resource warfare. This is economic espionage disguised as humanitarian crisis response. This is the beginning of something much larger than a Venezuelan power grid failure. Destinations included Miami, Panama City, and here's where it gets interesting, Moscow. 2 flights to Moscow. Russian registration. Antonov An-124 cargo planes. The kind of aircraft you use when you need to move something very heavy, very far, very quietly. But the Moscow flights weren't direct. They made stops, strategic stops at locations that reveal the true scope of this operation. First stop, Minsk, Belarus. Officially a refueling stop. Unofficially, a transshipment point where Venezuelan silver gets repackaged, relabeled, and distributed to final destinations across the former Soviet sphere. Second stop, Astana, Kazakhstan. The heart of the Eurasian Silver Processing Network, where raw silver gets refined into industrial products for the Chinese manufacturing sector. Final destination, Moscow. The Russian Strategic Metal Reserve Complex, underground facilities where silver joins gold, platinum, and other strategic materials in vaults that are designed to survive nuclear war. Russian involvement in Venezuelan mining isn't new. Rosneft has had contracts in the region for years. But Rosneft extracts oil. These flights originated from mining territories. These flights carried cargo that required specialized loading equipment. These flights moved under diplomatic cover that protected them from international oversight. Someone emptied the Venezuelan silver reserves before the crisis hit. Someone with access to state-level logistics. Someone with the authority to move strategic materials across international borders without customs interference. Someone who knew exactly when the lights were going to go out. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was a controlled demolition of the Venezuelan mining sector, timed to maximize resource extraction and market manipulation. But the Venezuela story is just the surface, the tip of the iceberg. The visible part of an operation that goes much deeper than anyone in the Western financial system realizes. The real crisis is what this shortage reveals about the global silver market. Because when 12% of annual supply disappears overnight, the remaining 88% becomes visible. And what we're seeing in that remaining supply is a system on the verge of total collapse.